Well, the Al-Aqsa flood. That's the name that the Hamas gave the attack on the 7th of October. And it was used, by the way, by Iran and others, okay? The terrible atrocity of murder and rape and mayhem. The Ring of Fire is the name that the Iranians gave the whole proxy scenario that they built around Israel. And it seems like a couple of days ago, one of the major aspects of the Ring of Fire was put out by the Al-Aqsa flood. And I find it fascinating to make that connection because the 7th of October started off instigated the events that led up to what we saw a couple of days ago in Damascus. And that's what we want to talk about today. This is DaviD TaL. This is the Balagan Connection. Balagan is a mix-up, mess-up. Connection means we're tying different aspects of this going together. And everything has changed in the complicated balancing act in the Middle East. The last couple of days, we've watched, amazingly, the fall of Damascus. And no, it's not the biblical fall of Damascus. That is a different story. But this is the conquering of Damascus by the rebels that took over. And let's put it like this. It's very similar to the fall of the Berlin Wall. We're actually calling it the fall of the Damascus Wall. Because just like the Berlin Wall indicated the end of a long and sometimes cold and sometimes hot war between communism and the West, okay, the fall of Damascus, I think, indicates the unraveling of the Iranian proxy system, and that is going to be a completely different Middle East that we're going to see in the future. So let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about what happened in Syria. Let's talk about what that means for Israel. Let's talk about what America or what role America played in that. And let's talk about how this has biblical ramifications for what's going on. So what happened in Syria? What happened in Syria, first and foremost, is that the civil war in Syria never really ended. The civil war has been going on for more than 10 years. Bashar al-Assad, who is the president and the dictator of Syria, has actually used his own forces and even chemical warfare, has actually used the Russian air power that was given to him, has actually used the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, that actually fought for him. And what happened is that he's managed to hold it together for almost 10 years, including 2 years of relative, quiet in Syria itself. But a couple of days ago, this all fell apart. It's very interesting that it all fell apart just when Israel made a ceasefire agreement with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a organization called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which basically means the movement of the Levant, which was funded and trained and equipped by Turkey, has overthrown the Bashar al-Assad regime that has been in power for the last 60 years. Bashar al-Assad and his father Hafez al-Assad are an Alawite minority that has been ruling Syria with an iron thumb, and their cruelty has been known all through the Middle East. Everybody, including Israel, was completely surprised by the speed and by the relatively no fight that actually was put up by the Syrian army, and the speed with which the rebels actually took over first Idlib, then Homs, and now Damascus. Let's talk about who they are. They are a Sunni fundamentalist organization. Remember, Islam comes in Sunni and Shiite. They are the opposite from the Iranians, meaning they are the Saudi version of Islam. And they are, don't get me wrong, by the way, they are not great lovers of the West or of Israel. They are an organization that has its roots in Al-Qaeda and its branches in ISIS, and is connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is what connected them to Turkey and allowed Turkey to be their patron. No, they are not lovers of the West. No, they are not lovers of the U.S. And no, they're especially not lovers of Israel. But yes, they're not proxies of Iran, and here's why that is important. Syria has been under the control of an ISIS-style militant regime backed by Turkey. Syria is now under control of an ISIS-style military regime now backed by Turkey that is sitting all over Syria, including on the borders with Lebanon and on the borders with Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. Here's what is important. Iran has lost another one of its most important proxies in the Middle East. Add that to Hamas that's been smacked down. Add that to Hezbollah in Lebanon that's been almost taken out of the equation. Add that to the Iraqis who are really being very careful not to instigate anything against Israel. And what is happening now that Iran has totally lost its ring of fire. It is moving its assets out of Syria, and it's not going to be used. Syria is not going to be used as a base to attack Israel. A couple of things about how that plays out, because it was Syria, Iran, and Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Russia that were holding the Syrian regime together. Russia, though, has decided to throw Bashar al-Assad under the bus. The only thing that we know that Russia's actually done is put him on a plane and brought him to Moscow. As far as we know, the Assad family is in Moscow today. Very interesting side note, he might be used in the future against Syria again, meaning they might be keeping him as an asset that will give them the excuse to come down from the north and be a part of some kind of attack on this part of the world. And that's going to connect to what we're going to be talking about at the end of this video. But here's the thing. Russia has lost one of its important allies and assets in the Middle East. It has lost its influence in the Middle East. Syria is also the home to one of Russia's main Air Force bases and one of its most important naval bases on the Mediterranean Sea. Remember, Russia doesn't have an outlet to the Mediterranean, so the Russian base in Syria was a serious asset for them. But very quickly, surprisingly quickly, the Russians decided that if the Syrians are not willing to fight for themselves, the Russians are not going to fight for them. And so that complicates the situation. And this rebel organization, we call them the TSH, are now sitting in all of Syria, including Damascus, and including the border with Israel. And that is really, really important. This is a huge blow to Iran. And add that to the blows of Hamas and Hezbollah, Iran is seriously, seriously out of options. And we're going to connect to that in a few more minutes. And just remember how this is coming together. Israel. What is Israel doing with all of this? First of all, we're watching very closely what's going on inside there. This is really, really important. We're keeping a tab on what is going on. Israel has moved on to the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights are the part of the border, I think you can connect it here, are a part of the border that actually connects Syria and Israel. The Golan Heights have been the scene of wars in 1967, the scene of a massive war in 1973, and the Golan Heights actually have been the buffer zone between Israel and Syria. Israel has extended that buffer zone into Syria now, has taken some key observation points, among them on Mount Hermon, and has actually set up forces to make sure that we're not going to be attacked by these new rebel forces here. And in the meantime, we're using our air assets to bomb and destroy weapons that Israel doesn't want to see fall into the hands of these rebels. Mostly chemical weapons of mass destruction, long-range missiles, anti-aircraft missiles. I mean, if Israel has free reign of the airspace over Syria, we're making sure that these rebels don't get something in their hands, or we're trying to anyway, that we think might be used to threaten us later on. We need to understand that the situation, though, is not a good situation for Israel. If there's anything that unites any of the factions in Syria and any of the Muslim factions all over the Middle East, that is the hatred of Israel. Another main instigator of this event, the president of Turkey, Erdogan, is no lover of Israel either. And what he has just now achieved is a massive stronghold on the northern border with Israel, literally on the northern border with Israel, and influence even on what is going on inside Lebanon, because Lebanon sits on a border with Israel on one side and surrounded by Syria on the other side. And this might be a good aspect of, the Ring of Fire being taken apart, but it is not going to be a very positive regime that's going to take power in Syria today, and we're going to have to see how that plays out. But this is, or might be, a very interesting option. Next. If Iran has lost its ring of fire and its influence in the Middle East, what can Iran do not to completely fall apart? And what everybody is talking about is the million-dollar question: what is Iran going to do with its nuclear option? If they have lost all the different assets they have, the only card that they have left to play today is the nuclear option that is actually buried deep, deep under mountains inside Iran. Don't forget, Israel has taken out Iran's air defense capability, meaning we can fly over and do what we want, but it will be a massive undertaking to take out Iran's nuclear weapons. But it looks like, and again, depending on what we see is going to happen, that very soon Israel will not have a choice but to do it. The question is, do we do it alone, or do we do it maybe with the help of the new regime, the new administration in the United States of America? And that has to wait to be seen. What I'm worried about, and I'm going to say it here, and you can quote me later on, President Trump has said to Israel, do what you need to do and do it quickly, basically. And Israel is, I think, getting ready to do that. But one of the things I'm afraid that the American administration might do is say, okay, now that Iran is weak enough, we can put economic, diplomatic pressure on Iran to go back to some kind of Iran deal. We do this with the threat of the annihilation of the regime, but if Iran promises to play like good kids in the kindergarten and not to expand their nuclear program and not to export terror the way they've been doing, then maybe we can get them to agree to close off the nuclear program for a while. I'm kind of worried about that because we did that. It happened. President Trump actually put huge amounts of pressure on Iran and was actually moving, and he's done that in the past. But one of the first things that happened is that, first of all, Iran has been exporting oil illegally under the sanctions to China, but the second thing is we don't really know what's going on. And if there's anything that we learned from what happened in Gaza and Lebanon, and even what we learned from this event here in Syria, is that we don't really know what's going on. I mean, intelligence, as good as it is not complete. And that is something to say. Add on that Iran is seriously worried because the people in Iran have paid billions of dollars and suffered terribly economically. I mean, Iran has, I think, the sixth greatest oil reserves in the world, and Iran's economy is in free fall. And it's all because they're spending their time, energy, and money on exporting their jihad to the rest of the world. And if you're an Iranian sitting in Tehran, you're saying to yourself, I mean, why are we doing this? Now, don't forget, Iran has already seen one revolution, and don't forget that what happened in Syria, and what happened in Iraq, and what happened in Libya, and again and again, these are regime revolutions that are overthrowing the government. So the final question that we have to connect is, what does the Bible say about all of this? And open up the Bible, and if you go to Ezekiel 38, it says that Israel will be sitting in its borders in peace and security, not feeling threatened by anything that comes around. And while this is happening, the attack will come from the north. Gog, the head of Magog, or the battle of Gog and Magog, will be actually based on the premise that Israel is unprepared and feeling unthreatened. Now, if you have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said the only threat to Israel would have been a nuclear bomb or a mushroom cloud over Tel Aviv. And a year ago, nobody could have predicted, okay, any kind of peace in the Middle East. The 7th of October even pushed that further away. I mean, when that happened, and then Iran, the Hezbollah got into it in Lebanon, and then the Houthis got into it from the south. I mean, if you'd have looked a couple of months ago, you said peace in the Middle East. That's not even possible. But look what's happened. Hezbollah has been dismantled. Hamas has been buried underground in Gaza. Okay, the Assad regime and the Iranian influence in Syria has actually fallen. The Yemenis and Houthi are far enough away. And if this totally unravels, and if the world, including Israel, maybe the United States, puts enough pressure on Iran, and a regime change takes place in Iran, we will see Iran taken out of the arrangement. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Lebanon, Syria are just waiting to make a peace agreement with Israel. And if Israel is sitting in the middle of a peace agreement with Syria, a peace agreement with Lebanon on the north, a peace agreement with Jordan on the east, and a peace agreement with Egypt on the south, and economic ties and economic connections and diplomatic ties and connections, Israel might be feeling safe enough to not be afraid of what's going to come in from the north. So if Iran falls and peace comes to the Middle East, that might be the backdrop of the war of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38. That's the only way that can come about. And when you're looking at it like that, it does make so much sense. So that is the situation right now in Syria. We're waiting to see how this plays out, and that will impact the situation in Lebanon. That'll impact the situation in Iraq. That'll impact the situation with Iran. And the question is, how will Iran react right now? Without Iran, remember this, Israel is the strongest power in the Middle East. Without Iran to look down, Israel is the strongest economic power and the strongest military power in the Middle East. I mean, nobody will be able to stand up to us. And that, I think, is something to remember in the biblical interpretation of what we're talking about. So that's a situation right now. I'm really, really worried, curious, wondering what's going to happen in the next week or two, because if Israel is going to take out the Iranian nuclear capability, this is the time to do it. They have to do it right now. And we're waiting to see how that's going to come. The second thing I want to stress here is that it just came on my feed while we were talking here. President Biden is taking, taking credit for what has happened with Iran. We, the regime, did this and this and this. And I want to say President Biden was the reason it took us so long to do this. President Biden and the American administration did nothing to help Israel with the situation in Gaza or in Lebanon or in Syria. They just sat by, and now they're trying to take credit for it. And again, if anybody deserves any credit in the change of the situation in the Middle East, that is President-elect Trump. And God bless America for voting for and putting President Trump into power, because I don't know what he's going to do in the 4 years, but even before he's in place, he has changed the situation in the Middle East and put it in a better place than it was before. So that was a quick overview of what we're talking about. A couple of words. I want to put a link down here to Gijon Springs. Connect to that. Yes, please share this video with as many people as possible, because I've got a lot of people saying that this is the easiest and the most concise understanding of what's going on in Syria and the connection to the biblical events. So share this with your friends. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. If you want to support me and what I'm doing, go to the link down to Gijon Springs. That's the ministry that we are a part of. Gijon Springs, by the way, is a ministry that is connected to supporting Israeli soldiers in Israel, meaning we accumulate resources from supporters in the U.S. and through my connections and the connections of Jeff Johnson from Calvary Chapel Downey in the past, and we kind of support different aspects in Israel, both the IDF and different organizations in Israel. So if you want to be a part of that, or a way to support me and Christy in what we're doing here. I'm still surprised that this is all happening and the churches in the United States are quiet. It blows my mind that this is a biblical story being played out, and I'm not hearing enough from the pulpits in some of the churches that I'm connected to and others, and I'm saying, please, please, talk to your pastors, talk to people about making the story of Israel known. So that was DaviD TaL. That was a Balagan Connection today. Hope to see you soon.